Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. With our the workshops, we have a few workshops on the roadmap for 2020, and what we want to start doing more of and doing a better job with is as we start to ready for rollout, we want to get your feedback, channel feedback on the content, the construct, the instructional design of our workshops, which is what we'll cover today. And then in a subsequent session, we'll have likely Josh, our master trainer, or perhaps Michael, come back and do, once it's actually post-development and we're ready for launch as part of our ATP and UCI readiness, we'll also do a sort of a train the trainer on the workshop for everyone as well. So I will back up and hand it over to Michael next to give you time to actually go ahead and do this. If you have any questions, I think we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the call. Is that right, Thomas?
Yeah, definitely we'll have time, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Cool, thanks, Janet. So we were just talking in the chat before we kicked off about some of the challenges that we've had with training. You know, all of us just kind of transitioning from either doing, you know, a mix of virtual and in-person trainings to strictly virtual. And we wanted to make sure that as we're developing content going forward, that we support both of these delivery methods, right? With virtual training in this world that we live in now, we want to make sure that you have the materials you need to deliver professional training and have people feel like they're getting real value out of, you know, an instructor that only can connect with them virtually. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started talking about some of these different things that, you know, giving a training over Zoom, you can't exactly just walk around the room and get an idea of how your participants are, you know, grasping the subject matter. You know, you might have a student that's silently struggling and not really keeping up as well, or you know, something like that. That in a class you could just see that they're doing that. You know, give a little bit of extra attention to them while they're working through the steps of the training, that sort of thing. And we wanted to try to make sure that there's a way that you can virtually kind of have this experience of an instructor, you know, looking over your shoulder and helping you out. So it looks like my connection's a little unstable. So forgive me if I'm cutting in and out. But the way that we've split up content in this VR workshop that we're working on is through 3 different session types. If you are familiar with our Learn Lives, that would be this live session, this first type. The instructors are presenting concepts, walking through step-by-step through various challenging scenarios. This would be direct work on a project or small scenarios unrelated to a project. The other type of session that we have here is an activity session where the instructor will be there present in the Zoom room and kind of the participants are hacking on their project. So not necessarily following step-by-step what the instructor is doing, but working on, you know, now you've learned how to add one user interface to your project, try adding another one with this twist. So there's a suggestion, like a prompt, and the instructors are helping the participants, but it's not like a step-by-step follow the instructor kind of thing. So the instructor will periodically check in with the participants, hey, how's it going? That sort of thing. And then, like I mentioned before, the kind of experience where you have like a personal relationship with the instructor, right? Where they can look over your shoulder and say, hey, you know, that looks great on your project. I really like how you, you know, dialed in that interaction. So it really feels great. And that sort of experience I felt was missing a lot from our virtual trainings. So we made these office hour sessions where participants will show off a particular aspect of the project that they're working on. And the instructor will give them feedback, kind of point them in the right direction, answer any really detailed technical questions they have in that time. So that way you get a little bit more of that personal experience and something that you wouldn't necessarily get from following a course online. That's just, you don't get to interact with an instructor in that way. Cool. So those are the session types for these virtual trainings, and specifically this VR training that we've been coming up with. So here's the overview of the VR training, which I think was shared in the PDF with you all, but I just wanted to kind of walk through it here. Now you'll notice there's 3 session types that I described before. The instructor-led live session here in blue, the project activity sessions in this orange color, and in red, the office hour sessions. So throughout this course, the participants will be learning to create a design review application in like a VR design review application through building a capstone project. Now you'll see capstone project in a lot of this. So during the live sessions and during the activity sessions, they're step-by-step kind of adding new elements to this project so that by the end, they can have a complete kind of portfolio-ready project. Now, I'll come back to this slide and walk through step-by-step, but first I kind of want to talk about who this series is for and what they're trying to accomplish. So we see a lot of different personas that are interested in VR, right? You see people from games, you see people from the automotive industry interested in creating kind of like a design review application. You see people from architecture, engineering, and construction. They want to show off these new building designs that they have, or this floor plan that they have. And here you can see on the upper right there the kind of Unity office tour that we have is like an AEC project, architecture project. And then we have this design review application down here. But this series is really focused on not pure beginners that haven't touched Unity before. They should have some Unity experience, just maybe a little bit of knowledge of how to move around in the editor and build things. And then also a little bit of scripting knowledge is very helpful for this. It's not strictly required that you are a master C# programmer in order to do this workshop. There are scripts that you can share with the participants that they can just kind of plug in the editor. But this is really meant for people's first go into VR development. And specifically, we'll be covering the XR Interaction Toolkit, which is Unity's new framework for developing VR applications. It makes it really simple. I don't know if any of you have used VRTK or Steam VR before to try to plug into Unity and then have struggled with that at all. But I found that the XR Interaction Toolkit, since it's developed and maintained by Unity, it just flows a lot easier in developing VR applications. And we really wanted to make a training that dives into that. So this series is for people that are just jumping into VR and potentially looking for jobs in the VR industry, especially in these non-gaming spaces. I think this really applies to them. If they're looking for jobs in gaming, it might apply, but really if they're looking to have a great portfolio project for the automotive industry or the architecture, engineering, construction industries, this is a great series. So now I will back up to this overview and just kind of talk you through what all these sessions are accomplishing and what they're building to for the final capstone project. The very first session here, session 1 and activity 1. Now I'll give a quick overview here because these are 4-hour days, right? You see like 10 days of training here. They're just half days. And they usually work out to about 2 per session and 2 hours per activity. Obviously, you might want to change this around a little bit if you want to add a little bit more activity time or a little bit more office hour time. You could flex those activities out a little bit more. This is kind of how we've suggested that it goes. Leaving a little bit of room in the day, not necessarily going back to back to back to back. So in session 1, they'll start out by just getting their headset set up in Unity and building a simple solar system project where you can just grab planets and just look at them. It's not anything fancy, but basically we want to give space for the participants to get set up, get comfortable in VR, and make sure that they understand the process of getting their headset set up, testing something in Unity, and then building that project out. So that is kind of like a self-encapsulated day of building this small little solar system sandbox scene. Then in session 2, they move into actually digging into the XR Interaction Toolkit and the components called interactors and interactables. So for example, like a controller would be, you would have an interactor component on that controller so that it can interact with interactables in the scene, right? So interactables would be like things you can grab, things you can throw, things you can click on, that sort of stuff. And we really discussed this on day 2 in the context of your capstone project. So here's where the instructor will say, this is where we're headed with this series. We're going to develop this kind of application using these different kinds of interactions. So in the sample project that we have right now in the VR course, we have a automotive design review application featuring this model car. And basically, you see here the direct interactor in this upper left photo, where you can grab the car, kind of take it apart, right? So you're fundamentally kind of looking at how to design interactions in VR, both design and implement them so that so that users know they can interact with the door when it highlights, and they can grab it, and the feedback on actually interacting with those elements. So that fundamental interaction piece, locomotion in VR. So being able to move around this space, user interfaces. So you see here in this bottom photo, switching the paint material of the car and kind of a light configurator experience with this design review. And then moving on to talking about things like audio, lighting, post-processing, things that really create a holistic experience in VR, right? This isn't a giant world for everyone to explore around. This is a very tightly designed experience meant to give the participants kind of a little bit of experience in all of these elements of VR development so that they make a small vertical slice of something that they would, do maybe every day on a job that they get into, like maybe they're making in a future job, they might make like a way more robust version of this design application. But for the purpose of this workshop, we've really kind of dialed it into this small vertical slice that kind of they'll walk through in all these 10 sessions. Now, in session 2, they will be kind of talking about the goals for building that capstone project. Now, we've included those automotive assets, but we also have a sample pack of assets of like architecture and furniture, so that if your audience is more in that AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction crowd, you could walk them through building a apartment tour, right? Where they're picking up furniture, they're changing the color of it, they're arranging it in a room. They're, pulling up UIs that maybe have the cost of the certain appliances or things like that. So really the same fundamental, types of interactions and types of interfaces that they're building in VR can apply to these different types of projects that they can then set themselves. So that first office hour session, the instructor will be meeting one-on-one with the participants to talk about their goals and to kind of make sure that they scope right to actually finish this in the 10 sessions that are allowed, right? I feel like a lot of, especially if you've never built something like this before, the tendency is to overscope. But making sure that that office hour session happens there to really hone in with the participants what they're trying to build and what's within scope for the workshop. Then from there, moving into actually talking about getting around the space in VR. A common experience that people have when first developing for VR is like, well, like, you know, they're used to just maybe developing desktop applications where you can use, you know, like a joystick or like your keyboard to just move freely around a large space. And that's not quite the case in VR, right? We need to have these things like teleportation, snap turns, all of these methods for getting around a space comfortably in VR, and really talking about the best practices for that. So in session 3, they'll learn about that, and then in activity 3, they'll implement it in their capstone projects. In session 4, kind of where we talked about before with these user interfaces where participants can interact with them using raycasts from their controllers and change aspects of the apartment that they're touring or the car that their design review that they're looking at, right? So you saw the simple material swap in that image here, changing the paint color to yellow. And then again, in that activity, they're kind of iterating on that experience that they had, building a simple interface, following step by step with the instructor. They're then kind of saying, okay, well now what if I did this and I, you know, made an animation so that the car's doors open or so that the cabinet doors open, all triggered through a user interface. So kind of taking what they learned in session 4 and again, kind of implementing it in their own way in their own project. In session 5, they'll talk about kind of, this is where we get a little bit more into coding. Now, we were really careful when we designed this session that you could follow along step by step if you had no programming experience, right? It's just like, write this line here, and the instructor could leave up their code. Now, it is ideal that participants have some experience programming, so this really has an impact on them, and then they can take this and say like, oh, well, now that I understand the XR Interaction Toolkit as a framework, here's how I can extend it and use it to make more advanced interactions. The one that we demonstrate in this session is a two-handed grab action. So instead of just grabbing a thing with one hand, when you grab, say, you know, you want to do for this design review application for the car, we have actually, I don't know if it's in these images here, but the engine of the car is on a table next to the car, and you can pick it up with one hand, and then you see a handle on it that you can grab with the other hand, and then kind of rotate and scale the engine so you can look at it up close and kind of get that, you know, close-up view of something that is really just tucked away in the car. You know, so I find that that's a pretty cool interaction to show and walk through step by step during the session. In the activity and office hours session, they'll kind of implement that in their own way in their project. Maybe they're not so comfortable with coding and they just want to do a couple more of those kind of two-handed interactions. That's totally fine. And if they are, they can kind of, you know, really, this is where it really opens up for them as to what they want to work on in this activity session here. Now you notice that the activity sessions and office hours are side by side here. The instructor, the way that we've kind of done this is for the instructor to just jump into breakout rooms with the participant that they're doing the office hours with, but then checking back in on the students that are going through the activity so that they can answer any questions that they have during it. Now, one way that we found that was really helpful for this is to actually have 2 instructors. And this is just in general best practices that we found for Learn Lives as well, is that while an instructor is kind of going through, it's kind of difficult to monitor the Q&A and chat, especially if there's a large number of participants. So really good to have a TA to be, you know, both when the lead instructor is doing the office hours and also for when they're leading the live sessions. It's good to have that TA to be fielding questions, answering them, making sure everyone's, you know, following along. So that's the first week, or the first 5 sessions, I should say. you could theoretically, do this like a really intense boot camp style where you've got session 1 in the morning, session 2 in the afternoon. But again, yeah, we found that leaving a little bit of room to breathe in between these is pretty good. So I'll kind of go through the week 2 now. This is really more about, now that they've kind of learned these really fundamental things, this is kind of about polishing the experience. So actually talking about audio and user experience, things like, doing particles when you hover over an object to show that it's like interactable, and to give the experience of interacting with it, making the audio feel like there's some ambience in the environment, so it's not just completely silent. It's a big thing in VR. Doing directional audio so you hear it out of the correct ear. Then moving on to finalizing the lighting and the post-processing effects in VR with attention to performance. So one extra thing that we've added in here in session 8 and 9 is actually using photon networking to create a very simple networking component to this application where multiple users can join in and kind of examine the car in real time. And so that takes the place over these 2 sessions of 8 and 9 that they add in the simple networking and test it with, I need that now, says Chris. That's pretty great. Yeah, it is really amazing to, that's the only reason why I've not used XR interactions, because of Photon. I had to build my own. Yeah, we had to do a little bit of custom work to get the XR interaction toolkit working with Photon. It wasn't too difficult, but it was, it is again a session where they need to know, where it helps to know programming. The instructor will walk them through step by step, and there's example scripts in the project they can use. But yeah, it's both tricky and more simple than it seems at first. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, we'll talk later, Chris. But yeah, I find that that's a thing a lot of people want to do with VR, is make these networked applications. So really it's not a deep dive into networking. They're not going to do RPC commands or anything like that. They're going to set up a simple Photon room and have multiple people join. And that experience is actually really cool. I don't know if any of you have experienced like multi-user VR applications, but it is just on a different level. Like it is like when you can actually see someone waving at you and the way that their head moves and stuff, it is really neat. So I find that that's a pretty rewarding end to the experience. Now, session 10 is really dedicated to just finalizing their project. And yeah, it sounds fun to see the students' reactions. Yeah, for sure. And then, so finalizing that capstone project and going through and reviewing it, giving a formal review and kind of giving the students a direction that they could take it further in. But also the main kind of thing that they do during this live session here, this blue segment, is that they will upload their project to Unity Connect to use as a portfolio piece. So at the very minimum, by the end of this workshop, they should have taken some good screenshots and some, they use the Unity recorder to make a brief recording of the different interactions in their capstone project, and they upload that to Unity Connect so that they have that as a portfolio piece. And then from there, they will kind of review that project, either just one-on-one with the instructor or as a group, depending on the group that you're doing. We didn't want to say every single time you must have students go on the spot and present to all of their peers or people that they don't even maybe know, depending on how you set up your workshops. But we kind of left that either to be that one-on-one office hours type, or you can just extend that live session and make the instructor kind of pass on the screen sharing to one of the participants that they can show. So yeah, that's the overview here. I'm checking my time. I'm looking pretty good. I think there was a couple more things I wanted to cover. Yeah, so as far as the headsets that this works with, we've specifically tested on HTC Vive, Oculus Quest, and Oculus Rift. It should work on Windows mixed reality headsets as well. The ones that you have to kind of watch out for are the 3 degrees of freedom headsets, so stuff like the Oculus Go. It's not going to work in that. It requires the 6 degrees of freedom headset where you can actually get up and move around the space and use 2 controllers to interact with things. And in addition, we talked about the prerequisites of kind of understanding Unity a little bit and having some C# knowledge. I do want to go over an example segment from the instructor guide from session 2, where we talk about interactors and interactables. We've kind of laid out this instructor guide in a new format. And this is something I'm kind of curious about getting your reactions to, but we can talk about this in the Q&A. We've split it up into like literally like a minute-by-minute breakdown of kind of, how the day should be going. Obviously, sometimes timings change when you're delivering things, right? Maybe you get a question or someone's got a bug, so you have to spend longer on something, but really giving this guideline, I find, is pretty helpful. So you see here in this top section is the demo where the instructor is either walking through slides or walking through things in the Unity editor. So here we're walking through the different types of interactors, Ray, Direct, and Socket interactors. So this segment might take place in slides where the instructor is giving conceptual information. And then they might go into a demo where they talk about the parameters themselves in the inspector, right? And actually showing what these different things do and the different kind of settings that they could have to make a good user experience with these interactors. The other thing that we have here is an instructor notes column. So things that your students might be thinking while you're going through this, right? You talk about socket interactors, but then you don't really build one. So it's like, hey, we're going to talk about socket interactions at the end of this session, but for now we're going to focus on Ray and Direct. So things that aren't necessarily, material that you need to cover, but it's just helpful to kind of remind yourself, oh yeah, I need to tell the participants this, right? So direct interactors require colliders, so make sure you demonstrate putting a sphere collider on this, and don't forget to do that. So I found that those notes are really helpful when delivering things. And then once the instructor has gone over this demo section, here's that kind of challenge thing. And those of you that have done Learn Lives will kind of recognize this format as like, I do it, now you do it. So they can kind of talk about, decide whether they want to use these direct interactors and actually grab things with their hands, or use Raycast, where they're kind of shooting a line out to grab something. And then actually creating and configuring these on their own while the instructor is kind of answering any questions about it. Cool. And that's about it for the overview of this. I wanted to make sure I gave lots of time for questions and for any comments that you all have.
Perfect. Well, thank you. So what I'll do is that I'll open the phone lines. So then everyone will be, I think, automatically put on mute. But if you have any questions, you could unmute yourself, or you can continue to use the chat function, of course. So just give me a couple of seconds to unmute, or to open the lines for everyone. And yeah.
Hi, this is Dave Girding. I'm not sure, but since I'm new to this, I'm relatively new UCI, when would we be able to look at the materials to walk through them ourselves and sort of dive in? Is that how that works?
Yeah, Janet, maybe I don't think we have an announced release date for the materials yet, but I'm not sure how like previewing works. I guess that would happen in the webinar with me or Josh, where we would actually kind of do the train the trainer experience.
Yeah. So I would estimate. Hi, David. Hi, Dave.
Hi, good to hear from you.
I would estimate that you'll, as Michael mentioned, there'll be a train the trainer session in July.
Oh, okay.
Potentially mid-July, with availability on my live book within the next week out from there.
Great. Cool.
Yep. What other questions are there?
Hey, Michael, this is Mary. Your internet kind of got a little unstable right about the time you were talking about the sessions being based on 4-hour days, and you said something about, I was thinking it said 2 hours, but you were cutting in and out. Can you kind of cover that timeline on how the sessions are broke out in time?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, sorry, my internet's usually really good, but of course, once you're leading a webinar, that's when it's like, it's time to start cutting out on you. So we've broken this up into 4-hour days here, and kind of typically the live sessions, these blue segments, will be about 2 hours, and so we match that with 2 hours in the activity sessions. Now, since these activity sessions are kind of open-ended, they could theoretically extend for much longer than 2 hours. You kind of have a prompt that you give them and guidelines, right? This could even be you have 2 hours with the instructor, but then they've got a week to do the homework and to expand upon this activity before they go to session 2, which might even be week 2, depending on how you want to set it up. But the important thing is that the live sessions are going to be about 2 hours, and we recommend having about 2 hours of the instructor actually being there with either during the activity or the office hours to kind of guide participants on the activity challenges.
That's
I have
great.
a follow-up question to that, Michael.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I suspect that ideally the session and the activity are go hand in hand so that the learner isn't forgetting what was demoed in this session.
Exactly.
Okay, so at minimum, I'm just trying to talk this through out loud for folks who are thinking about any sort of changes to the modular approach they may want to take from maybe condensing this to elongating sort of the construct of the workshop. So at minimum, each sort of engagement is with the learner is 4 hours. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yep, and that's how we've kind of set it out, is that the 4 hours is the minimum, and then from there they can have either, you could decide to stretch that activity time out for 4 more hours and have a full day out of just after you learn the basic setup of just making that simple material swapping UI, right? You could say, okay, now I want you to build 2 other UIs in your project today, and I'll kind of be here to answer any questions you have as you do that.
Great. One last follow-up to that. If you can share if this is a potential approach. So for example, if I want to do, make this a 10-week course. So day 1 is week 1, day 2 is week 2. Does this workshop lend itself to learn these particular objectives in that way from week to week?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the only place where that might not hold up is the final session, where you're just kind of, that's more of we're done now. What you could do there though is literally have them just do a week and have a polishing your capstone project checklist. And then at the end of that week, that's when you have the review. But yeah, you could really stretch it out. Even this very simple solar system application that they build in session 1 and activity 1, you could say, hey, I want you to do this, but now, make it actually to scale with the solar system and make the planets rotate around the sun. And that might not be a great idea to have it scale with, if you actually think about the actual scale of the solar system in VR, that's a lot of locomotion. But maybe make a tiny version of it. There's all these things that you could do to kind of expand upon the basic kind of building blocks that we have here.
Yeah, so I mean, and just for everyone else on the call, we're totally keeping it casual here. And I'm just also sharing feedback along with you guys. So I might suggest, if folks agree, Michael, here is that we share this as sort of an example versus a statement.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
And I think the document that I pulled this from, I literally cut out the title of it, this screenshot here that says example 10-day outline. So it's kind of just like a suggestion, right? I think the important thing, Janet, like you mentioned earlier, is that just the minimum is 4 hours for one of these blocks, right? The 2-ish hours on the session and the 2-ish hours on the activity. Now, obviously, that'll limit you with the office hours, right? So if you have, say 12 participants in your workshop, right? You want to make sure you have enough time with them in the office hours. So depending on the size of your audience, you might want to scale that one out as well, to make sure you have at least like 15 to 20 minutes with each student.
This is Dave again. So is there because when I look at this, I had some experience in the past doing consultancy, on-site training, and it was an unusual product that was like a week-long on-site intensive, like 10-hour days kind of thing. And there was always pressure back from the clients to try to figure out how to shorten that because it was such an interruption in a business cycle. So what's your experience, or what's the general take? Is there going to be, could one anticipate that there's going to be sort of more pressure to try to condense it into 8-hour days? Do you have any reaction to that? The idea of like longer versus shorter delivery and the mix of efficacy and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What we've seen a lot, especially with virtual training, is that people want to do like shorter segments, because it's kind of tough to be sitting at a computer all day and not actually like face to face with someone. That's another reason why this recommended kind of example thing that I've shown here is only half days, right? So that they have, this kind of more intensive following step by step, and this time on the computer. Then maybe they're going away from the computer for a bit for lunch, and maybe they're working on, their, a project that they're working on for work in the afternoon as well. But yeah, I think especially now, like schedules are, people might want that kind of approach where it's just a small little session every once in a while. But I didn't want to stop people from saying, like, if you run your training center like really intense boot camps, you say you come here for a week and I will have you with a polished VR application. You could design that sort of experience with these building blocks as well. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it makes sense to let them breathe a little bit, at least kind of, 4 hours is kind of like, like I definitely recommend taking a break in between the live session and the activity as well. Just like literally telling people to get up from their computers, because it just kind of helps, I think.
Thanks.
This is Chris. I have a question for you. Is there a particular reason why you wait till day 6 to talk about user experience in VR? This is exactly like a lot of the ones I mentioned that I run, and I actually talk about that way earlier, so people aren't making bad experiences, which they always do the first time.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. You will be talking about designing good experiences, and there's a little, like those instructor notes that I showed, there's a lot of like little design tips in there for sure as well, right? So it's sprinkled in throughout, but it's not until day 6 that they really stop and say, hey, what is a way that we can make this experience like even better, right? Like up until then, they've completely ignored audio, so it's like, that's a whole nother sense that you can add into your project and like, really enhance the experience. So yeah, not ignoring it, but not dedicating a full day to it until 6, just so they can kind of get the fundamentals
feet wet.
of. Yeah, exactly.
And where is the Photon interaction system? Where's the link to that?
Oh, so It's not like a full system or anything. It's just we've along with this workshop and the example project, there's some sample scripts that that have a that configure the XR rig in such a way that it's able to be shared across networks without, when you move your head, it's like the worst thing if you don't set it up properly, and someone else's head, like you're controlling their headset. It's like
Oh yeah, no, I've been using Photon for my multiplayer interaction system for years. So the fact that you have one in the XR Toolkit makes the XR Toolkit a lot better to use. So
yeah.
That's why I'm very interested in it. So that'll be in this package, which we'll hopefully get soon. Second thing is, what locomotion systems do you teach specifically?
Yeah, so we teach, so they're all kind of built into the XR Interaction Toolkit.
Mm-hmm. The teleport's the only one they have for the most part.
Yeah, so they have teleport, which is the, we don't teach any kind of like free movement where you tilt the thumbstick forward and move around.
Okay.
I just feel like that was a little bit like too far in this direction of branching out. Like, not to get too specific here, but I think like it's like a fringe case of like, if you're designing a game or an application, like you might have a power user who's really comfortable in VR that wants to use the thumbstick-based locomotion that makes some people really sick. But if you're designing a design review application where you're just going to put like, a lot of times in automotive industry, like if you're making a car design review, this is so that an executive at your company can put this headset on and look at the car. They might not have ever been in VR before. And so moving around like that is...
I actually worked with Ford and Lincoln for 10 years, so I know all
That's
about
right,
this. And
that.
they actually wanted free movement.
Really?
Specifically. So I'm going to disagree with that 100%.
Okay.
But yes, that's why I asked about that one.
Interesting.
They also wanted flight mechanics as well, which is, I think we talked about this iGrail flight mechanics, so they could fly around and look how they're going to do. So that was just something I wasn't sure if you went into any extra ones, but that makes sense. Just you teleport for this one specifically. But yeah, the designers and power users, you'd be surprised how that works. And another thing I teach is the concept of getting used to simulator sickness, because the longer you're in VR, the higher your tolerance becomes. All my testers who used to get sick by the slightest movement are now running around in Stormlands like nothing's going wrong, just from a couple of days. So it's definitely a tolerance. It's definitely a get in VR for more than 5 seconds sort of thing. Because that's what a lot of people do.
Yeah, that's a really good angle to come at it from. Like I feel like this very much comes at it from like hey, how do we make it the most comfortable that we can possible? And
of course. Don't get me wrong. This is very true. I was just wondering if that's part of that workshop. That's it makes sense not to do that to start with, but that's good to note for later.
So yeah, awesome. To answer your question in a more specific way, it's that teleport-based locomotion, both on flat kind of planes, if you want to just pick any point on the plane, anchors, so if you want to like go to a specific anchor and it locks into place, and snap turns as well, where you can quickly turn around.
Yeah, the stuff that's built in. So the stuff that's basically built into the toolkit already.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, that's all my questions.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Help us break this, you guys. What are we missing? What are we missing that's going to make this help make you guys successful in selling and delivering this new workshop?
I think a big thing is that I don't see in here is what can this do? So I'm working with a company right now. They're learning Unity for the first time. It's not part of your system. They hired me before I was instructor. And I basically introduced virtual reality to them, and they're like, wait, what? What can it do? You mean we can replace all of our video department? We're doing all these videos in front of people and flying people out during COVID? That's amazing. A list of applications and how Unity can be used to do that, I think would be better. Like a car interaction is great for like product showing off, and you have your social networking avatar system, but like training, videos, talking about the weather. If any of you have seen Spaces, the application they have for That's made in Unity, I think it is. The application where you can be a weatherman behind a desk and record that way. That sort of stuff I think is missing to kind of like give them an idea of what to do. A lot of stuff is right. I mean, it's great to do the capstone, but I think also almost a free reign of here's possible things to do and here's the path to take in these would be really good to have.
Yeah, I definitely agree that this one doesn't necessarily branch into all the possible uses, especially the huge one that you mentioned is training. I find that that's like something a lot of people want to do in VR. And this doesn't necessarily dig into that as much as it could.
And I think that's honestly what I think would make it successful is talking about, you have multiple users, you have network testing, you have all that, but I mean, having a car where you can pick is a great example, but it doesn't really teach. That's consumer VR, which in the time of COVID, no one wants to do. No one's going out to put on a VR headset, and these big companies aren't going to put their application up on Steam for you to go download and play with.
Right.
Yeah, good feedback. Thanks.
Sorry, what?
I was saying good feedback. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, so that's the big thing I would talk about in this. Go ahead. So that my feedback is that one, and then the social VR, I actually wouldn't, if I were to do this, I wouldn't put the social VR on this one. I would make a whole separate thing about that and designing for social VR.
Yeah.
Because multiplayer and VR all in one is going to, we have to get them to understand multiplayer.
Yeah, it's a very simple introduction in this one. It's not, it doesn't really dive into it.
It's a teaser.
Yeah,
It's a
I hear
teaser,
you.
which is perfect.
Exactly. So actually,
it's almost like this would be this is why I mentioned about a lot of your trainings is you have this overall view. You need to segment it off into smaller trainings. So this is the overall starting point. Then you do a 2-day, 3-day course about VR training, one about networking more advanced, and kind of split it off. Rather than having one big training, have lots of little tiny trainings that people can do. Like, oh, I have 1 day. Oh, they offer a training for that? That's not 10 days. I can have my guys go for 1 day. As I think you mentioned that, Janet, I think it was? Yep, that you, there wasn't, people don't want to take 10 days out because, people got to make money. So tiny little trainings are usually preferable over big, large ones.
Yeah, so
That's
there's how do I want to say this? So the approach that we are continuing to iterate on is how do we develop for an entire channel and the entire channel needs. And so to your point, Chris, and to other feedback that we've received, more sort of general feedback is that a lot of personas are looking for job readiness or new job competency. So with that, we've iterated a bit with some of our workshops to provide more of that boot camp experience, hence this 10-day longer training. So a lot of our sort of commercial training partners are really keen for this type of content. In addition, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, and note to selves that what's it called? Non-disclosure. NDA in effect here is that we are having some, so we have some great, fantastic organizational changes that are happening. So we're still fleshing some things out. Our folks are getting settled into their new homes. But I think we're still continuing with the approach where we'll have sort of a baseline of really key sort of get ready workshops, get a job ready, get a new job competency ready. And then it'll split off to some specialization, sort of badging, smaller constructs. Is that fair to say?
Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't wait to see that because I think that's going to make the trainings much more appealing overall, rather than little tiny little things that go off. Because you'll get people who, I've been doing Unity VR forever, but I'd love to know how to do multiplayer. How would I set up a training experience? I don't know how to do that. A lot of just companies are yelling at me every day to start up Unity, as you guys I'm sure are aware. Remote work is really important.
If you have users that are already familiar with the XR Interaction Toolkit, there's nothing stopping you from just taking days 8 and 9 there and just teaching that.
Well, as I said, I haven't used it before because it hasn't worked well with Photon.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So we've actually built an interactive. I actually have them build an interactive toolkit that I built manually and been using for years for that one, and it's much less. It's pretty simple and definitely can't do as much as yours can. But that was the biggest thing, is being able to network it easily. It requires a lot of recoding, as you saw, to get to work, and that's all anyone wants is multi-user, and then they don't ever use it. But people, their eyes are bigger than their stomachs a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Just a sort of future thought or feature-itis thought, which is at some point for the follow-on pieces. I thought at some point I'd heard or reference to some kind of sim-oriented stack or framework that was forthcoming from Unity. Maybe it was a new product, I couldn't remember, but clearly there's a connection point between the training applications for VR and the sim piece. I know some of my students, that there's a poll already for people using Unity in sim context. So anyway, I'm looking forward to that sim product, because that to me seems to fit neatly with what folks would want to do with VR.
With the Unity simulation product?
Yeah, right. And I'm sorry for not knowing more about it. I just vaguely remember hearing or seeing there might be a product or a new something coming.
Yeah.
Are you talking about Reflect?
No, I'm not talking about Reflect. I thought.
Oh, it's called Unity Simulation. Yeah, there it is.
Okay, there you go. Well, see, I wish I knew all the things, but it just seems to be that might be a good sort of overall package of here's how to get to a viable kind of VR-based training competency using the sim stack as the light, hopefully lighter weight means of implementing whatever systems you're modeling. A frying machine or I don't know, whatever it is that you start with the system design from the sim side, as opposed to necessarily obliging folks to come in from the UX VR experience side.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. All right, we got about 5 minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, definitely let us know.
Just when can we get our hands on it?
July.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Some point in July.
But when in July? That's
End of July.
That's probably it.
July-August.
July-August is when it'll probably appear, yes.
I gotta use that more often.
That's great.
Yeah.
I have a question, Michael, that may put you on the spot. If it does, let's take it offline and we can follow up with the group after. How does this VR workshop work with, so we have an intro to VR workshop that exists already, right? How do these play or not play together?
So the intro to VR workshop is a little bit more games focused. It's really about just kind of making like a cool stylized game, and it's a little bit shorter. This is more of a holistic, long-term, kind of like that job readiness aspect that we were targeting, looking at building out a portfolio project, and a little bit more leaning more towards these non-gaming industries.
Got it. Thank you. And just quick note for folks on the call, the Intro to VR one that I'm speaking of is one of the 8-hour models.
And that does not use XR Interaction Toolkit. I believe that one uses VRTK, but I'm not sure. I didn't build that one, so I can check if anyone is curious about that. Cool. Well, if there aren't any more questions, Janet, do you have any final remarks?
Yeah, so we will continue to stay engaged with everyone as we start to ready for deployment of this workshop, and looking forward to talking to you guys again once we have a finalized product and can share more with you all on how you can see it in action.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks all.
guys.
Nice
Have a great
talking to
rest
you.
of your week.